Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our show for today. You're joining the What is the Word podcast and web series with me, Reverend Cory, with the Swedenborgian community online, and my co-host.
Hi, I'm Alyssa.
Alyssa Cover, my partner in love.
Yeah.
So today we're going to jump back into a book we've been enjoying by the 18th century mystic Emanuel Swedenborg, who had a lot of mystical visions of the afterlife and the spiritual realm. At least he said he did. And he wrote a lot of books exploring what those visions and how God was leading him inform some of the things that we sometimes take for granted in our different religions and traditions and spiritualities. And especially when it comes to opening up our faith so that we're not as divisive and selfish in our approach to religion. We have more respect for other religions and faiths, but also we have a better understanding of what it means to have faith. Have you been enjoying this series so far?
I have. It's been nice because this is one of the smaller books Swedenborg wrote, and it's been nice to sort of go through this as a jumping off place for connection and for more spiritual exploration, and honestly in theology, which Swedenborg's theology can be a lot sometimes, so it's really nice to start with something that's a little bit more palpable.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot because he wrote a ton of books, and he had a lot of things to say. But it seems like he kind of comes down to these same core ideas. So I also appreciate kind of diving into a shorter book, which you can download for free in our description, hopefully, depending on where you're at. But if you can't find it there, then in our webpage, swedenborgiancommunity.org/explore, you can download a lot of free books there by Swedenborg. Some by Helen Keller and other famous Swedenborgians. So let's just jump in. And do you remember where we're at?
Yeah, we are going to start with section 21 of faith.
Nice.
It is one thing, though, when we love our neighbors for the benefit or service they offer us, and another to love them for the benefit or service we offer them. Even when we are evil, we can love our neighbors for the benefit or service they offer us. But only when we are good can we love our neighbors for the benefit and service we offer them. Then when we are loving to do good because it is good, loving useful service because we have a desire to be useful, the difference between the two attitudes is described by the Lord in Matthew 5:43-47.
So we start to love to do good because it's good.
Yeah.
And loving people for more altruistic and open reasons.
Mm-hmm. Last time we were reading about, and Swedenborg was explaining what the neighbor is and what it means to love the neighbor. And so now we're talking about how to love the neighbor and where our intentions lie. And I really appreciate this difference, that the difference between us being evil and good, and how that changes how we can love our neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember him describing neighbor as being the good in other people, which makes sense. Often we treat neighbor as everyone. And I think in a way it is everyone. We should love everyone. In fact, Christ says we should love our enemy. But in terms of loving your neighbor, that idea tends to tie back to loving the good in other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the story, the Good Samaritan, about which one's the neighbor, Jesus at the end asks, well, which one was the neighbor? And it's the Good Samaritan. And so highlighting how it's the good in people that's our neighbor, not just everything. We don't have to love the really hurtful, destructive parts of folks, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. In a way, we have to accept what's going on, but you don't want to embrace that abusiveness in yourself either, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Keep going.
So, yeah, more. This is still section 21. It's pretty long, so. People often say, I love such and such a person because that person loves me and does me good. But loving others for this reason alone is not loving them deeply. unless we ourselves are intent on what is good and love the good things that they do for that reason. That is being devoted to caring. The other is being focused on a kind of friendship that is not the same as caring. When we love others because we care about them, we unite with the good they do and not with their personality, except insofar and as long as they are engaged in doing what is good. Then we are spiritual and are loving our neighbors spiritually. If we love others merely out of friendship, though we unite ourselves with their personality, including the evil that belongs to them, in that case, it is hard for us to separate ourselves after death from a personality that is devoted to evil, though in the former case we can. Wow.
So what did you get out of it?
That part of this us being good versus evil is about our spirit, and that we have to love them more than just who they are, but love their spirit.
Yeah, love something fundamental about them. Maybe. Reminds me of what Swedenborg says, like angels see when they look at people, they strive to see the good in people. And a lot of traditions and ideas tell us to see the good in people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he focuses so much on people doing good, because I know it can be hard to tell if what people are doing is necessarily good, especially around like, their motives. But I think it's more kind of like a spiritual vision, and also just an acceptance that we may not know, but we love them for that intrinsic good and whatever good they're doing.
Yeah. So let me finish out this section. Caring makes this distinction by means of faith, because faith is truth. And when through truth we are truly caring, we look carefully and see what we should love. And when we are loving and benefiting others, we focus on the quality of usefulness in what we are doing. Cool. So Swedenborg is tying this back to caring, and that being a foundation of faith, and caring being tied to this wisdom. So earlier, and I think the first part about faith that we started, faith is talked about as sort of this intrinsic awareness, this inner wisdom from divinity that takes cultivation. And part of the caring journey, as Swedenborg is pointing out, is carefully looking and seeing and sort of tending that good that we see in our neighbor. And that's part of loving and caring for others.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I remember him exploring earlier how truth has to do with goodness. And truth is kind of like the description of goodness. And you can misuse truth for like evil purposes, or at least selfish purposes, which kind of falsifies it, even if it's true.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It's like there's a purpose for things having like truth as like within their description, or how you would describe them. It's to uplift health and goodness and life.
You want to read
Sure.
22?
I'll read. A love for the Lord is what love really means, and love for our neighbor is caring. There can be no love for the Lord in us except when we are caring. It is in this that the Lord unites with us. Since faith in its essence is caring, it follows that no one can have faith in the Lord except while caring. Union comes from caring through faith, a union of the Lord with us through caring, and a union of us with the Lord through faith. On the reciprocal nature of this union, see another one of his books called Teachings About Life for the New Jerusalem.
Oh, cool.
So let's repeat that last part. Union comes from caring through faith, a union of the Lord with us through caring, and a union of us with the Lord through faith. So it's almost pointing to how caring, like that compassion, comes from a deeper place, and it's more clearly from God to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that he would put it that way, but it's kind of cool. And then with us towards the Lord, it's through kind of the more external cognitive element of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. In our world, we talk about love, and it seems like sort of a descriptor. And Swedenborg points to the action connection of love, and love being of action, and it being this moving thing. So what I really liked about that last sentence is you could actually, with the words, sort of feel that the movement of love and connection and the importance of the unity and it all flowing together. And that being how caring and love continue to grow and be uplifted in ourselves and our communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. That movement. It's kind of like dance.
It is like dance.
Which you know something about.
I tend to find the movement in things because, that's one of the gifts I've been given is the gift of movement and dance. And so when I hear words, I often will draw out some idea of movement through them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a gift we can all lean into a little more. You enjoy teaching the kids?
I do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fun thing when we're talking about caring and love. As a dance teacher, I have to not only be the example of caring and love in their lives, but help them figure out how to own those things in their own lives and to care for one another and to uplift love and courage and all these things. And so that's why reading Swedenborg and having my own spiritual practices have been actually very helpful in it, because sometimes it's hard. You're connecting with kids who have whole lives you don't know about, and they bring with them, everything in their own lives, even through Zoom, as we have been doing lately. You still have to figure out, how do I care for my neighbor? And in that case, I have larger responsibility because my neighbor's a teeny tiny person growing up to be a big person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep going. To summarize, to the extent that we turn our backs on evils because they are sins and turn to the Lord, we are engaged in caring and therefore in faith to the same extent. I think it's because you're highlighting the beauty of dance and how even teaching kids can be kind of this process of uplifting faith and charity, faith and goodness in a sense, like cognitive awareness and a orientation towards what's healthy.
Yeah.
And then also just a affectional one. When we read this first part, he's using this term, turn our back on evil because they are sins, and we engage with caring and turn towards the Lord. It's I see the dance in that.
Yeah,
cool.
That's neat.
Yeah, thanks for that. On our being engaged in caring to the extent that we turn our backs on evils because they are sins and turn toward the Lord, see these other readings. And on our having faith to the same extent, see this other reading, and on the true meaning of the word caring, explore them further. And we may conclude from all this that a saving faith, the faith that is an inner recognition of what is true, can be found only in people who are caring. Now, this is something we've come across in a couple other personal explorations recently, and in other faiths and other approaches to Christianity even, this awareness of what's true, a recognition of something from within. But he talks about it pretty regularly, this kind of intrinsic knowing when something's true. And he's saying we can only get to that place. I can't say I'm at it yet, but we can only get there if we start caring.
Yeah.
Become compassionate.
Well, yeah. And it's that caring that helps us, and sort of by doing the readings like this that allow us to, sharpen that blade of intrinsic awareness, of inner knowing, of wisdom, that allows us to be able to turn away from or cut away the bad in our lives. Just like when we're, taking care of our plants, sometimes there are leaves you have to take off so it can grow better. And we only know that by spending time with the plant and learning more about what it needs and watching it grow. And the same with our faith and our hearts and relationship with God.
Oh, lovely analogy, yeah.
Yeah. What I have an interesting time with in this last little section is, growing up from such a conservative background, the idea of like loving the neighbor and hating the sin, being sort of this tool for hatred of one another. And when I first read this, I sort of get that feeling of that. But what I like about Swedenborg is he really points out the importance of, well, he identifies the neighbor so differently that it really changes the meaning of it. And it's not like, oh, I like you, Cory, but I don't like whatever about you. That's not, like, that's what I grew up with, and in a lot of ways it was harmful because it was against, the LGBTQ community and against a lot of other open and affirming spaces that I exist in now. And it's just, it's nice to sort of refocus that idea in something more about helping cultivate love and goodness in communities, and being there for your neighbor so they can make choices that are better for them.
Yeah, being there. Being more accepting of those differences. But you do bring up a good point. What's the difference between, let's say you're talking to like a serial killer.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say you hate what they do in that?
Yeah, and it would be very hard to be like, I like that person at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some gray area that we have to explore.
Yeah.
I think one thing is maybe not to hate anything.
That's true.
And I think often like those, when we kind of become very fundamental when it comes to like anti-LGBTQ things, and we're not really loving them either. We may like make a show that we love them, but we hate their sin, but it's really, we treat them like we don't care about them.
Yeah.
We undermine their rights. We don't care if they get justice, et cetera, et cetera. And so really we have to like be aware of our actions. Is our goodness matching our words? And if our words seem very truthy and maybe a little off, but kind of on point to some degree, but our actions are even more destructive, then I think that's a sign we should reflect on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about Swedenborg using so many movement-based wording is that it sort of eliminates the idea of hate in a lot of ways. Because even when Swedenborg talks about something we might consider as hate, he rewords it as like love of self and those kinds of things. And so saying turn away from evil, like look away from it, and point yourself towards God. Which is cool because when we talk about heaven and hell, and the readings from that, the idea is that the levels of heaven are focused more on like the direction in which they're turning towards God to some degree, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. I like how emphasizing that kind of turning away from evil and turning towards God is more personal than, like, he's not saying look at evil really hard and judge it. Like,
yeah.
Like get really, like start beating it up. He's saying look away from evil, which I don't think is the same thing as like become ignorant.
Yeah.
But like stop focusing on your evil, like your selfish intentions. And he's talking about our own motivations and desires. Turning towards that light of compassion and awareness and away from some of our darkening impulses in terms of spiritual dark and obscurity. And I don't know about you, but like if I fall into a lustful binge of hot Cheetos or something, like whatever it is, whatever the desire is, like I think when we just give ourselves to it, like a lot of times we come out of it feeling worse for wear.
Oh yeah, plenty of times.
Yeah, and then of course there's much worse examples, but like just turning away from some of those attachments and deep lusts, and finding kind of a healthier awareness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we keep going?
Yeah.
We're moving to a new section,
New part. Yeah.
another part with a long title.
I love long titles.
You want to read it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our knowledge of what is true and good does not become faith until we are engaged in caring. Once we have faith that is born of caring, though, that knowledge becomes a resource that gives form to our faith.
So that's number 25 if you're following along.
Yes, so number 25. I'm going to read the first part. Right. From earliest childhood, we are eager to know things. Because of this, we learn a great many things, some of which may be useful to us and some of which will not. When we grow, we get involved in some occupations and absorb information about it. And as we do, the occupation becomes a way for us to be useful, and we begin to love it. This is how our love of being useful begins, and this love leads us to also love the means that allow us to do our occupation and make it effective. I love that that's how this section starts.
Yeah.
It talks about like as humans, we desire information, and we just there's this drive towards being useful that starts simply because we want to learn.
Nice. Yeah, that draw to learn and know.
Yeah.
It's a really healthy impulse, as Swedenborg points out. And I think no matter our religiosity, our standpoint in science or what we know, if we have that desire to learn and kind of start breaking down our biases against learning some things. I think sometimes we walk into a lot of situations with hypotheses. How does that work? And that limit our ability to learn because we say, well, of course there's no God and all spirituality is BS, or people who look at science are distorting everything. Like, if we become a little bit more open and realize we don't know everything about these kind of large areas of life and allow our walls to kind of fall, our ability to learn grows. And so leaning into that impulse to want to know can be really healthy and can take us to all kinds of amazing places, as we've seen in history.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah.
So in this section, he goes on to say, this process applies to everyone in this world because we all have some occupation to which we progress. Beginning from the service we envision as a goal, through the means to the actual service that is the result. However, since the service and its means have to do with life in this world, loving it is an earthly type of love.
So, repeat a part of that. What do you think is the key point there?
I like this last sentence. However, since the service and its means have to do with life in this world, loving it is an earthly type of love. So what I think is interesting is we can take these earthly types of love, like my love for dance and how I use it in this world, and from there be a jumping off point to connect it with the spiritual world and use it as a tool to cultivate spirit too. Yeah. Which is, as Swedenborg says, is my envisioned goal for life.
Your envisioned goal.
Yeah. And I have lots of ways in which I get to do that, and it's so cool.
Yeah, I like how it's connected to what we do in our lives and kind of deepening it.
Yeah. But also it stems as like a warning that these loves can end at earthly loves.
Yeah.
And to use the wisdom you get from faith and caring to start to know and recognize that. Yeah. You want to read the next one?
Sure. Since we all not only look toward what is useful for our lives in this world, but should also look toward what is useful for our lives in heaven, after all, we will get there after life in this world, and that is where we will go on living forever. From our childhood, we acquire some familiarity with what is good and true from the Word, from the teachings of the Church, or from sermons, and this knowledge is relevant to our eternal life. We store this away in our earthly memory in greater or lesser abundance, depending on our own desire to know, a desire that is both inborn and reinforced by various stimuli. And then number 27, all this knowledge, though no matter how much or how valuable, is nothing more than a resource out of which a caring faith can be formed. And this kind of faith is formed only as we turn our backs on evils because they are sins. If we turn our backs on evils because they are sins, then this knowledge becomes part of our faith, which has some spiritual life in it. But if we do not turn our backs on evils because they are sins, then our knowledge is nothing but knowledge and does not become part of a faith that has spiritual life within it.
Yeah, I think this section's interesting because it's Swedenborg starting to dive into the ways in which we learn about good and evil, and how we learn and experience those the knowledge we gain really determines more about our spiritual life and how we grow.
Yeah, this idea of how our knowledge and even everything we do in our life is essentially useless and often destructive if our intentions aren't kind of shedding their evil impulses and trying to build good. Because in a way, I think he's pointing to how it's the spiritual side of life, it's that internal aspect that's the most valuable thing, and building up kind of that internal richness to deepen our lives, our spiritual lives, involves stepping away from kind of these shallow impulses that keeps these memories and these external things as just shallow things. Because they don't have the deeper purpose of goodness and life and spirit.
It's interesting.
So number 28. This resource is of critical importance because without it, no faith can take form. Our knowledge of what is true and good becomes part of our faith and strengthens it. If we have no such knowledge, faith does not happen. There is no such thing as an empty faith, a faith without content. If we have only a little of such knowledge, our faith is weak and needy. If we have an abundance of such knowledge, our faith becomes rich and full in proportion to that abundance.
It makes me think of I was on TikTok and
Never heard of it.
And I was listening to a dietitian on TikTok talk about the way in which our languaging of things like saying empty faith or empty calories creates like a false understanding, and that in reality there is no such thing as empty calories or empty faith.
Or empty space.
Or empty space. There is just food that, like, when it comes to food, there's just food that has more nutritious value, not value, but like has different nutritious depth to it, and others that, you know, don't. So pizza versus a salad. Both might have their use, but we might paint one more as good versus bad, but one's not empty.
Yeah, and then you start comparing that to destructive things you could digest.
Yeah, that's true.
Know. Still not empty, yeah.
No. Just maybe not good for your body.
No.
Or brain.
Also, did you label pizza as bad?
I might have.
That's ridiculous.
Pizza tastes great, and sometimes it is good for the emotional and spiritual well-being.
It has nutritional benefit. It depends on the pizza.
But maybe you don't eat it for every meal.
I'm going to start eating it for every meal. You've inspired a new diet, the pizza diet.
The pizza diet. Like the beer diet.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you might have heard of this. Certain monks go on beer diets, and now it's other people are doing it. I don't think it's recommended.
Not for your liver.
See your doctor first. Yeah, interesting.
But talking about spiritual things, you know, you have to decide for yourself as you learn what is helpful to your spiritual growth and what is not. And there's no such thing as empty faith. It's just faith put in certain spaces. faith to uplift each other, faith to destroy each other. We've seen them all.
Yes, yeah. Well, and I ultimately agree with his main point here that there is no bad pizza. So.
I like it.
Yeah. You want to go?
29. It is important to know, though, that faith is supported by knowledge of what is genuinely true and good. This is definitely not the case with knowledge of what is false. Faith is truth. And since falsity contradicts truth, it destroys faith. Caring, too, cannot occur where there are nothing but falsities. Since, as noted in section 18 above, caring and faith are united the way goodness and truth are united. It also follows from all this that a total absence of knowledge of what is true and good makes for no faith. Slight knowledge makes for some faith, and abundance of knowledge makes for a faith that is enlightened in proportion to its fullness. The quality of faith we have as a result of caring determines the quality of our knowledge, or intelligence. Knowledge works too.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, faith isn't faith, really, without caring. But also our faith can become more robust the more we know.
Yeah.
So, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I find that saying ignorance is bliss to be a high contradiction here.
Yeah.
And often we use it sarcastically because there's an element of knowing that is vital to who we are. But I think that also goes to like the ignorance of a child being blissful, which we talk about in faith a lot. And it's a different sort of ignorance that is not without knowledge.
Yeah, and often that term, is used pessimistically in a way. It's like, what they don't know won't hurt them type of thing.
Yeah.
That kind of ignorance is bliss. I can't help but think of The Matrix when that term is used.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this movie very well, but the bad guy, one of the bad guys, he's going to get his mind wiped and betray everyone because he's tired of the real world. And he says ignorance is bliss. Like, I wish I didn't know what I know.
Yeah.
But
knowing what you know means you can help save the world. So.
Yeah, it's like a cop-out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Like with kids, ignorance is bliss in a sense. And I think also, even the more you know, there's an element of truth in that phrase for me, because I think the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like an informed ignorance is bliss, because you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
And then you maybe rely and turn to the mystery of divinity more, like that kind of intrinsic peace within, instead of obsessively thinking about everything and dissecting and analyzing. You turn maybe more towards that compassionate part of you and that deep understanding, which in a way feels like mystery or ignorance sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the more we learn, the deeper our wisdom can be, and that often means learning that I don't know is a great answer. Sometimes I used to grow up thinking that I don't know was never something I could say. Like, I wanted to know and I wanted to have all the answers. But sometimes I just don't have the answers. I don't know anything about heaven and hell. I can make some, guesses, and I have a faith around it, but to know now? Nah.
Yeah, really, all our knowing is estimation.
Yeah, and there's actually a peace in knowing that I don't know.
Yeah. I'm exploring a text that talks about, like, realizing that we really don't know much about anything. And we make a lot of assumptions, and we also just kind of paint a fantasy in our minds. Indeed, like a lot of our conceptual thinking, like me versus them, this is an enemy, and I like this object, I dislike this object, has to do with our, obsession with knowing and owning and dissecting and controlling. And funny enough, a lot of Buddhist practices and even Christian paths, like A Course in Miracles, paints this picture of accepting that you know very little, and kind of breaking down that kind of habitual type of thinking actually opens us up to the deeper knowledge of faith that I think he alludes to often.
Yeah.
And that greater ability to care for others and other things, because we're no longer thinking me versus them. We actually think of others as part of ourselves. Think of other things, even our environments, as part of ourselves. And I think that falls into what Christ says, loving others as ourselves. Shall we continue?
Yeah.
You get it?
What are we on?
I think we're
on
right there.
30. There are many people, too, who do not have an inner recognition of what is true, but still have a faith that comes from caring. These are people who have turned towards the Lord in their lives and who have refrained from evil behavior for religious reasons, but who have been hindered from thinking about truths by worldly concerns and by their professional responsibilities, as well as by a lack of truth on the part of their teachers. More deeply, or in spirit, though, they are able to recognize what is true because they are drawn to it. So after they die, become spirits, and are taught by angels, they recognize what is true and they're overjoyed to receive it. Oh, that's sweet. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, we've been talking about sort of the inner recognition and the wisdom that comes, because I think we are two people who've sort of been on the path of seeking wisdom and cultivating truth through the inner recognition that comes from love. But I like that in this section he's reaching out to the people who are just drawn to truths without any deep education about it in a lot of ways. They've had simple religious teachings and are still drawn to truth because that's who they are at the core, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's a beautiful element of each of us that I think and I hope is drawn to truth. And I think leaning into that personally is a calling, something we can all improve on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it can be anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not just us, religious professionals.
Yeah, and I also love that this last sentence where Swedenborg talks about after they die, they get to be taught by angels. And I want to be taught by angels.
Well, in a way, he says we're taught by angels in this life through everything.
Yeah.
But it would be kind of cool to be hanging out with angels more obviously.
Yeah. And the after, I love this idea that our afterlife, that heaven is not this sort of just place of stagnantness, that people are always growing and learning and changing, and as Swedenborg would say, and heaven is growing and changing and becoming more and more perfect.
That's pretty epic.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, there's not a lot of traditions that have in-depth explorations of the afterlife.
Yeah.
In fact, just from a literary perspective, Swedenborg's books, especially Heaven and Hell, are the first Western books of the dead.
Oh yeah.
Because I think they might have been after Dante's Inferno, but Dante's Inferno was a fictionalized account. This is at least purported to be, or supposed to be, a non-fiction account, or at least true visions according to the author.
Yeah.
Whereas Dante's, of course, was meant to be fiction and sold as fiction. So it's interesting to have that kind of conception, and I think it also really fits with a lot of near-death experiences that people have.
Yeah.
Because in near-death experiences, even atheists have them, and a lot of these folks will say there were beings of light and warmth. I could really feel the love coming off them, and that's kind of what Swedenborg says about angels or people in heaven in the next life.
Yeah.
And that you learn from them, they tell you things, you go on missions, you get jobs, and it's pretty epic. And it's cool to hear you point out the idea that heaven itself is always growing and becoming more perfect, more in the divine image of God.
Yeah. That we as individuals and part of the spiritual part of divinity can eternally head towards more God. We'll never be God, but we can eternally head that way.
Yeah, well, we have God within, like intrinsically, yeah. And so we're eternally heading towards that full expression. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it also points back to the hope that everyone intrinsically wants to know truth and love. It's because, we all have divinity within us, so we get to help cultivate that within ourselves and within our community.
Yeah, and it's something we can invite in each other, because I don't know if all of us feel that intrinsic awareness or that intrinsic connection, but that's often because it's just layered over with our kind of habitual thinking and the way we were raised, and we carry our traumas and we carry our pain. So a lot of times it takes spiritual practices, different spiritual paths, and learning from each other to kind of break those things down a bit and start to become more aware of what you're talking about. So yeah. Nice.
Wonderful.
One more section?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, I guess second part of 30.
Nice.
However, it is different for people who have not turned towards the Lord in their lives and have failed to refrain from evil behavior in accord with their religion. Inwardly or in spirit, they do not feel drawn to truth and therefore have no ability to recognize it. So when they become spirits after death and are taught by angels, they are unwilling to acknowledge what is true and therefore do not accept it. Inside an evil life there is a hatred of truth, while inside a good life there is a love for truth. Yeah.
I think we see this kind of played out in the world stage today, where a lot of powerful people are misusing their ability to lie, so falsity, and often misusing truth, for their own evil, selfish purposes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it really seems like they buy their own dross or whatever it's called, but they have to know it's clear, evident lies, right? Like often they're just clearly lying.
Yeah, I think that's one thing, especially looking at today's climate, literal climate, but political climate, and all that is happening. I'm one that feels so drawn to want to help people see truth, but there's plenty of people who just don't want to even look at it. And as someone who wants to help uplift other people's divinity, knowing that people just don't want to listen is hard, but accepting that that's the path they're on is part of my own spiritual journey.
Yeah, you can't control others.
Yeah.
And hopefully we all kind of make it around to that place of compassion in life eventually. Some traditions say we have multiple lives because we still need to work it out, and Swedenborg seemed to believe that hell lasted a pretty long time. But you never know, right? And so, because his hell is a hell of our own making.
Yeah, which is what he's talking about here too.
Yeah, it's essentially, at least when we die, it's like the external representation of what's going on within us, and then also us in community with other people kind of like us.
Yeah.
So that's hell made manifest, but it's our hell. And if we're willing to change, if we're willing to learn from the trials that we bring on to ourselves because of our hellish, selfish motivations, if we're willing to change, then we can create heaven, we can move to heaven. And that's true for this life as well as the next, possibly.
Yeah. I always appreciate the Swedenborg's approach to spiritual life now and spiritual life in the spiritual realm after death, that it's all our choice. We can accept as much as divinity as we want, or we can reject it. And that's where we talk about freedom of choice being so important. and having the ability to choose how we want to live our lives. And maybe we make bad choices, but our hope is that we continue to, my hope personally is that we continue to help others see God, see love and connection, and uplift it more and more in ourselves and in others the best we can.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever our walks, let's continue to move forward, uplifting life where we can. Nowadays, a good way to do that is by voting.
Yes.
So be sure to vote.
It's coming up fast and is very important for our statesians.
Yeah. And uplift that power to vote, because we shouldn't be squashing anyone's power to vote. Should be empowering systems that are healthy and not just trying to degrade them because we're afraid of people voting.
Yeah.
And uplift health where we can. You know, we can't always get our personal way, but we can empower others, empower ourselves to, in a way, be more willing to accept that and just create as healthy of a space as we can. So, you know, it's been really nice creating some of that space, hopefully today with you folks, and you, my wonderful co-host. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to dive back into Swedenborg's theology and writings and to explore what they mean for our lives and how all things are deeply and intrinsically interconnected.
Amen to that. Now go forth knowing that you are quite loved. Bye.